Now, the rest of the story. In the late 1960s, Fred Smith was a student at Yale, trying without much success to make a particularly good impression on his economics professor. But then Fred got this idea for a brief economics thesis, something a whole lot more interesting than you might expect from a college paper. Anyway, the topic, Fred's original idea now, was a super-efficient, privately managed postal service, a hypothetical company that would buy for itself a fleet of jet aircraft, and the planes would fly only in the middle of the night? Don't get ahead of me. Letters and packages would be taken to a central location for sorting. Then the planes would fly the parcels to their destinations the same evening. That's right, that was the paper that Fred wrote for his economics class. And today, Frederick W. Smith is chairman and president and CEO of that hypothetical company. Only it's not hypothetical anymore. Today it employs 290,000 people. It earned $38 billion over the last fiscal year. Oh, and the fleet of jets that Fred envisioned in his economics class paper, there are 672 planes in it now, and 80,000 other motorized vehicles in the service of, that's right, in the service of Federal Express, the corporation that began as a college whim and became a worldwide sensation. In 1971, in the beginning, of course, Federal Express was aesthetically defined as an alternative to the government-run postal system. But isn't it interesting? Some of the refinements that Fred Smith incorporated into his revolutionary enterprise were indirectly inspired by the government. You see, after graduating from Yale, Fred enlisted in the Marine Corps. He would serve 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. Incidentally, he'd never forget what he considers the best advice he ever got. It was from a Marine sergeant who told him there are only 3 things you've got to remember: shoot, move, and communicate. But more to the point, Lieutenant Smith became fascinated by military procurement and delivery procedures. And his observations only encouraged him, so that when he got back home, he told himself he would go forward with that overnight commercial delivery service, the one he had dreamed up in college, and his main competitor, the United States Postal Service. Today it's barely holding on to its 32% share of that market, against the 31% market share of Fred Smith's Federal Express. And can you imagine? It all started with a college paper for an ordinary economics class. It's not often that the origin of an institution can be pinpointed so precisely. But here's the lesson in all of this: how easily Fred Smith might have been discouraged. Or did I mention that on that school paper he wrote, the one in which he outlined one of the biggest business successes in all American history, on that school paper he got a C. He was graded a C. Only now you know the rest of the story.
And now the rest of the story. Did you hear that FedEx and UPS have been considering a merger? If it goes through, the company would be called Fed Up. Sorry about the dad joke. Fred Smith owned Little Rock Airmotive, a corporate aircraft interior decorating, customizing, repair, and lube and tune shop in Little Rock, Arkansas. He founded Federal Express Corporation in 1971 with $4 million from his inheritance and $91 million in venture capital. 2 years later, Fred moved the new company to Memphis, Tennessee, where it operated out of Memphis International Airport. Overnight flights began on April 17, 1973. John Fry, a childhood friend of Fred's, sent his business partner, Terry Manning, to the Federal Express home office near the Memphis airport with the first package to be put into the system. With 14 jets, the company carried 186 packages that night. Although Federal Express marketed itself as the freight service company with 550 mile per hour delivery trucks, the company was losing about $1 million a month. Fred needed money. Fred tried to lure investors into the failing company, but all said no. Fred didn't know what he was going to do. As he sat in the Chicago airport waiting for a jet to fly him back home to Memphis, Fred worried about the payroll. Without money from investors, he would not have the money to pay the employees on the upcoming Monday. Fred decided to take a risk, maybe the biggest risk of his career. Rather than waiting for his flight back to Memphis, he took an earlier flight to Las Vegas. A short cab ride later, and Fred sat at a blackjack table gambling what little money he had left. Fred realized that the house, the casino, had the advantage, but he played anyway. By the time Fred quit playing, he had won $27,000, just enough money for him to cover payroll. The $27,000 wasn't decisive, Fred said later, but it was an omen that things would get better. And things did get better. With a more positive outlook, Fred raised somewhere between $50 million and $70 million, depending on which source you read. In 1994, Federal Express officially rebranded itself with the shortened version of its name, the name that most people had used for years to refer to the company, FedEx. Today, over 700 aircraft are used to deliver packages between airports. That FedEx truck that often visits your house is just one of over 30,000 in operation around the world. Now let me tell you about another business that started in a similar manner as FedEx. Todd Graves was born in the great state of Louisiana and went to college at the University of Georgia. We can forgive him for that because he came back home. In 1994, Todd returned to Baton Rouge intent on opening a restaurant. He had thought long and hard about what his restaurant would offer. He wanted something that had universal appeal. He narrowed his list down to chicken fingers. Most of us call them chicken strips. Todd partnered with Craig Silvey, a business student at LSU, Louisiana State University. Together they wrote a business proposal called the Chicken Finger Bible. Craig proudly turned the proposal in and was sure that they had struck gold. He soon learned that the Chicken Finger Bible didn't earn the highest grade in the class. It wasn't even in the middle. It received the lowest grade in the entire class. The lowest grade. Craig's professor explained that a restaurant serving only chicken finger meals would never make it. You have no prior restaurant experience and no money to invest in the business yourself. It won't work. Now remember, South Louisiana has some of the best food in America. Maybe I'm a little biased there. Craig and Todd had faith that their plan would work. Their disappointment turned into determination. Armed with their proposal, Craig and Todd visited bank after bank and investor after investor. The wording was never the same, but the answer was always the same: no. Craig and Todd had no money of their own to invest. They could get no loans, nor could they convince anyone to invest in their restaurant. They seemed to become more resolute with each rejection, but they needed to make a lot of money and in a short time. Isn't that what we all want to do? Well, Todd left Baton Rouge and began working sometimes as much as 90 hours a week as a boilermaker in an oil refinery in California. He was raking in the money. Then a co-worker named Wild Bill suggested that there was even more money to be made in commercial sockeye salmon fishing in Alaska. So Todd packed his bags, took a flight to Alaska, and hitchhiked to Naknek, Alaska. For a month he slept in a tent on the frozen tundra before he could convince a boat captain to give him a job. Now salmon fishing was long, hard, dangerous work. During peak season he worked 20-hour days, and boats would often ram each other to get better sets for their nets. Once he earned what he thought would be enough to start, Todd returned to Baton Rouge. This time around, Todd was able to get investors and a small business association loan. Todd searched for the perfect location and found it in an old, run-down building at the entrance of LSU. Todd and a small crew of workers labored day and night to renovate the building. Finally, on August 26, 1996, Todd and Craig's restaurant opened. Business was better than they could have imagined. The line to get the tasty chicken fingers was crowded all day. They were so busy that they stayed open until 3:30 the next morning. They slept a few hours and did it all over again. They made a small profit the first month and Todd was thrilled. "It was one of the best times of my life," he said later. Shortly after they opened a second location, Craig Silvey sold his shares of the partnership to Todd. Originally, Todd wanted to name the restaurant after the occupation that had made it all possible, sockeye chicken finger. But his friends convinced him that the name just wasn't exactly appetizing. Finally, Todd named the restaurant Raising Cane's Chicken Fingers after his dog and used a photo of his dog wearing sunglasses as its mascot. Today, the company has over 750 restaurants in 37 states and in 4 Middle Eastern countries, which employs more than 50,000 people. Unlike Fred Smith of FedEx, who had a multi-million-dollar inheritance, Todd Graves worked his way up from the absolute bottom. Todd Graves is now a multi-billionaire and the richest person in the great state of Louisiana. You know, I've often wondered what that LSU professor thinks about the Chicken Finger Bible now. I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching. And now you know the rest of the story.